We're often taught to see history as this straight line, right? A simple story of progress that leads directly to, well, us. But what if that whole picture is wrong? Today, we're going to dig into that. We're going beyond our modern assumptions to reframe how we understand the sheer ingenuity of the ancient world. Let's get into it.
That feeling of astonishment, as natural as it seems, it's actually built on a whole bunch of assumptions we have about the past. And those assumptions might just be getting in the way of seeing what was really going on. So let's try a little thought experiment. Instead of just asking how they did it, what if we asked something different? What if we asked how our own feeling of surprise actually shapes and maybe even twists our view of human history? Okay, so the first big problem with being so astonished is a little thing called selection bias. It might sound like a technical term, but it's a super powerful filter that basically warps what we even get to see from the past, leaving us with a very specific and, let's be honest, incomplete picture. Think about it this way. What we see in the archaeological record is totally biased. We're looking at the greatest hits of ancient civilizations, the massive stone structures, the things that were tough enough to survive for thousands of years. But what's gone? Pretty much everything else. The millions of wooden homes, all the organic stuff, the everyday tools. And what about all the failed attempts, all the trial and error? That's the full story, and it's almost completely disappeared. And looking at just this highlight reel does something else too. It messes with our sense of time. We see these incredible structures, and we kind of picture them just popping into existence, like it was some sudden leap of genius. But that idea completely erases the hundreds or even thousands of years of slow, patient, gradual development. I mean, just look at Göbekli Tepe. It's one of the most incredible prehistoric sites anywhere. This place wasn't a single project. It was a sacred spot that grew and changed over 1,500 years. Generations of people added to it, changed it. To give you some perspective, that's a longer period of time than the one that separates us from the fall of the Roman Empire. So this wasn't some sudden magical feat. It was a long, cumulative, generational effort. This huge sense of time brings us to another really key idea. Our whole modern definition of technology completely colors how we see the past. We judge what they accomplished using our own tools as the standard, and that is a massive mistake. See, ancient peoples relied on something we can call technique. This has nothing to do with electricity or machines. It's about the clever application of skills that were perfected over generations, combined with unbelievable social organization and the one resource they had a ton of: time. Our world is obsessed with speed and efficiency, right? Power tools, getting it done fast. But ancient builders, they often had different priorities. They were aiming for precision, for things that would be incredibly durable, and they achieved that through a deep mastery of their materials and by coordinating massive groups of people. Their solutions only seem mysterious because their methods and their goals were different, not worse, just different. Thinking this way also helps us completely tear down that old popular image of ancient civilizations as these little isolated bubbles of genius. The reality was a deeply interconnected world, where ideas, goods, and people were constantly moving over huge distances. The Indus Valley Civilization is a perfect case study. The work of archaeologists like J.M. Kenyoyer has shown that it was a major hub in a network that stretched for thousands of miles. They were talking to Mesopotamia, trading with cultures in the Arabian Gulf, and connecting with societies in Central Asia. This wasn't a world of isolated pockets. In many ways, it was already a globalized one. And here's the thing, innovation wasn't a one-way street, flowing from one advanced culture out to everyone else. Not at all. It was a web. You take concepts like positional notation and the number 0. They journeyed from India, were then refined and passed on by brilliant Islamic scholars, and eventually found their way to Europe, where they completely transformed science. Knowledge was always moving, always evolving. So why does any of this matter? Because all this talk about surprise isn't neutral. It's not just a harmless sense of wonder. It actually serves a purpose. It subtly reinforces a very specific story about human progress. When we're always surprised by the past, it makes our own time feel like the peak of achievement, like our technology is the obvious endpoint of history. It also sends our curiosity down the wrong path. We get fixated on the puzzle of how did they lift that stone, instead of asking the much bigger, much more interesting question:
What kind of society could organize itself to make this possible?
When you get right down to it, it all comes back to a simple biological fact. The people who built these things were us. They weren't different. 10,000 years ago, humans had the exact same brains, the same capacity for logic, for creativity, for long-term planning. So if you give people like that enough time, social organization, and a good reason to do something, well, their achievements aren't surprising at all. They're exactly what we should expect.
And that leaves us with the real mystery, doesn't it? Maybe it's not about what happened in the deep past, but about why we keep looking at it through this lens of disbelief today. If we shift our question from how were they so advanced to why did we ever think they weren't, well, that opens up a much richer, more respectful, and a far more accurate way of understanding our shared human story. Think about it. Whenever we look at something incredible like the Great Pyramid or a sprawling complex like Machu Picchu, this is the question that always comes up. How could they possibly have built this? It comes from a place of awe, for sure, a sense of wonder at what seems totally impossible without our modern tools. But what if that question, as well-intentioned as it is actually the wrong one to be asking? What if that very sense of surprise is actually a blind spot, preventing us from seeing the past for what it truly was? What if it's all based on a set of ideas about progress that are, well, just plain flawed? The truth is, that question, how could they have done it, it probably tells us a lot more about ourselves and our own time than it does about ancient people. It's a modern question, and it's built on a foundation of some very specific and, as we'll see, often incorrect assumptions. A huge part of that foundation is something called Eurocentrism. It's basically the tendency to see the world through a lens that puts European culture and its historical path on a pedestal, treating it as the universal standard for everyone else. And when you do that, it can really distort your view of the rest of the human story, making anything that developed differently seem primitive or even impossible. So this way of thinking leads to three really big, flawed assumptions. First, that our technology is the only way to achieve complex results. Second, the unspoken idea that ancient people were somehow less intelligent, that they lacked our advanced cognitive skills. And third, that all of human history is one single, straight line of progress that, conveniently enough, ends with us. And this idea of linear progress got baked into the field of archaeology pretty early on. Just think of the classic three-age system. The Stone Age, then the Bronze Age, then the Iron Age. That system was developed in 19th century Europe to describe European history. But then it was applied to the entire world, forcing all these diverse global histories into one neat European-style timeline. But history isn't a single race with one finish line. And these kinds of flawed frameworks had some pretty serious consequences. A classic example is the old Aryan Invasion Theory. Colonial-era archaeologists looked at the incredibly advanced Indus Valley civilization and just couldn't imagine it had indigenous origins. So they came up with this idea that it must have been brought there by outside invaders. But of course, decades of later research found zero evidence of any invasion. It was a myth, a story that was just imposed on the past. So, it's time to correct the record, and we're going to start by looking at some amazing evidence that pushes ancient timelines back way, way further than we ever thought possible. Let's start with a date, 9000 BCE. That is the new, absolutely astonishing date for the beginning of continuous cultural occupation in the Indus Valley. This comes from research at a site in India called Biharana, and it pushes the origins of that entire civilization back by thousands of years. And this is a really crucial point. We're not just talking about some civilization that popped up, flourished, and then disappeared. We are talking about an unbroken cultural tradition that stretches across millennia. It's a story of incredible continuity, of adaptation, not just some dramatic rise and fall. And hey, it's not just the Indus Valley. Let's head over to modern-day Turkey and look at Göbekli Tepe. Just look at this comparison. At around 11,600 years old, it is more than twice the age of Stonehenge. It's more than twice the age of the Great Pyramid of Giza. This find is an absolute game changer. The reason this is so important is that Göbekli Tepe completely flips the old script. Get this, it was built by hunter-gatherers before the invention of agriculture. They somehow organized themselves to quarry, carve, and move these massive pillars, some weighing 7 to 10 tons. And they did it using sophisticated geometry, not just trial and error. This proves, without a doubt, that you do not need to be a settled,
farming society to build something truly monumental.
Okay, so we've seen that ancient civilizations are way older than we thought, but they were also incredibly diverse in how they developed. There wasn't one path. So let's look at how different cultures took completely different roads to innovation.
Let's take metallurgy, for example. The standard European model goes Stone Age, then Bronze Age, then Iron Age. Simple, right? But in sub-Saharan Africa, things went very differently. Many cultures there pretty much bypassed a distinct Bronze Age altogether, and instead developed really sophisticated iron and copper working at the same time.
And we're not talking about borrowed technology here. Iron smelting was independently invented in Africa as far back as 2500 BCE, and the innovation was incredible. The Haya people of what is now Tanzania, for instance, were producing high-quality steel in the 2nd century CE using furnace techniques that were more than 1,000 years ahead of anything similar in Europe. This was brilliant, homegrown innovation, perfectly adapted to their local resources. Now, let's jump across the Atlantic to the Americas. The Maya developed what is arguably the most accurate astronomy in the world before the invention of the telescope. They didn't need our modern tools to map the heavens with what is, frankly, breathtaking precision. What's so amazing about the Maya is how deeply integrated all their knowledge was. They used incredibly advanced mathematics, including, famously, the concept of zero, to create calendars that could track the cycles of Venus with stunning accuracy, predict eclipses, and even align their entire cities with the stars. For them, it wasn't just about observation, it was about this deep, fundamental connection between the cosmos and every aspect of their life. So, what does this all mean when we put it all together? Well, when we connect these dots, we start to move beyond that single, simple story of the past, and we arrive at a much richer, more complex, and frankly, more accurate view of human ingenuity. The evidence is pretty clear. Innovation wasn't a single story that started in one place. It was global and happened independently all over the world. Progress isn't a straight line. It's more like a branching tree with countless different paths. And you absolutely do not need modern tools to achieve sophisticated, incredible things. You just need human ingenuity, careful observation, and a deep understanding of your world. So maybe it's time we retire that old question. Instead of looking at these ancient marvels and asking, how could they have done it? Maybe the much better question is, what can their ingenuity teach us today? What new perspectives on problem solving, on sustainability, on knowledge itself can we gain by studying these diverse and brilliant paths from our shared human past? Now that's something to think about.